What?
Jonathan, are you ready? Once upon a time, a widower had a daughter who was wonderfully kind and good. He married a second wife who was proud and very selfish. She had two daughters, and they were as mean as their mother. The wedding over, the second wife no longer pretended to be pleasant. She knew well that the sweetness of her husband's child made her own daughters seem even more unpleasant. So she hated the girl, and made her work at all the meanest household tasks. The poor girl cooked and scrubbed and cleaned her sloppy stepsister's big fancy rooms. Her own room was in a tiny, cold attic, but she never complained. She knew it would have disturbed her father, who had troubles enough. His new wife bossed the poor man terribly. In the evenings, she'd sit by the fire in the cinders. Her stepmother called her Cinder Crawler. Her younger stepsister, not quite so mean, changed the name to Cinderella. Despite her name, she was far lovelier in rags than her stepsisters in their expensive gowns. One day, the king's son sent invitations to a ball. The girls chattered and scurried, trying on dozens of dresses. I'll wear my red velvet, said the elder, the one with the real lace. I'll wear my plain ball gown, said the other sister, but I have my diamonds too, and my cape with gold flowers. They had the best beautician in town come to the house to tell them how to do their hair. Cinderella had excellent taste, and they sent for her to ask her opinion.
What?
I'll do your hair if you like, she said. As Cinderella brushed away at their hair, they teased her. Wouldn't you like to go to the ball, Cinderella? I'm afraid a ballroom is no place for me, she answered. This isn't a very good story for Daddy to read, is it? I'm not very good with all these voices. I'm afraid a ballroom
Yeah.
is no place for me. It's okay. You're so right. Imagine a cinder crawler at a ball. How people would laugh. A girl less good than Cinderella would have made their hair look like haystacks. But she did her best to make her sisters stylish. They were pleased. They were so busy primping and prancing at their mirrors that they forgot to eat. They broke dozens of laces, trying to make their waists small, but at last they were ready to leave for the ball. Cinderella watched, and when they had gone, she wept a little for loneliness. Her fairy godmother came to see why she cried. I wish I could go to the ball, Cinderella sobbed. Do as I say, and we'll see, said the fairy. Get me a pumpkin from the garden. Cinderella brought the biggest pumpkin she could find. The fairy hollowed it out and tapped it with her wand. It
What is
became a
it?
splendid golden coach.
What is
Then she
it?
saw 6 mice in a trap.
What?
She let them out, tapped them with her wand, and there stood 6 fine horses. She still needed a coachman. Would a rat do? asked
Lying
Cinderella.
down.
What?
I'm lying down.
You're what?
Lying down.
Oh, yeah, I'll keep reading for you, though, okay?
Okay.
Okay. She still needed a coachman. Would a rat do? asked Cinderella. Yes, indeed, said her fairy godmother. Cinderella brought a rat trap. The fairy chose a rat with long whiskers and made him into a tall, bearded coachman.
Hey,
Then the
I'm
fairy said,
lying down.
There are 6 lizards by the garden gate. Bring me them. Cinderella brought them. The fairy turned them into lively, trim servants who hopped up beside the coach. There now, said the fairy. You can go to the ball. Are you glad?
Yep.
Yes, said Cinderella shyly. But can I go in these torn old clothes?
It
Then the fairy's
down.
wand really worked a wonder. Cinderella's rags became a jeweled crown of gold and silver. Her shoes turned into glass slippers. ermine lined, and just made for the dancing. She looked beautiful. Cinderella got into her coach. Her godmother said, "Have a good time, but remember one thing. You must leave the ball by midnight. If you don't, your coach will be a pumpkin again, your horses will be mice, your servants will be lizards, your glorious gown will turn back into torn old clothes." Cinderella
What
promised to
the?
leave before midnight and started out for the ball. Cinderella promised. Rebecca, where's your band aid?
Why?
Anyways,
Why?
Cinderella promised to leave before midnight and started out for the ball. The prince's couriers ran to tell him an unknown, beautiful princess had arrived. He came to meet her and led her into the ballroom. A hush fell over the guests. All eyes were on the exquisite girl. The old king stared, too, and whispered to his queen that it was years since he'd seen anyone so lovely. The ladies noted her hair and gown. They planned to buy things like Cinderella's if they could. The prince led her out to dance. Her dancing was a joy to see. Supper was served, but the prince's eyes never left Cinderella. She sat with her stepsisters and gave them some fruit from a basket the prince had given her. They twittered with pride at being noticed, for they didn't recognize Cinderella at all. As they chatted, the clock struck 1/4 to 12. Cinderella made her farewells and left. When she got home, she thanked her fairy godmother over and over. Then she asked if she might go to the ball again the next night. The prince had begged her to come. Her godmother said that she could.
Why?
Just then, her stepsisters arrived. Cinderella went yawning to the door, hoping they'd think she'd been asleep. They were still exclaiming over the lovely unknown princess. "She was nicer to us than to anyone else," said the elder. "She even gave us some fruit." Cinderella smiled and asked, "What was her name?" "No one knows. The prince would give anything to find out." "How I'd love to see her. Won't you lend me a dress so that I can go to the ball?" said Cinderella. "What? Cindercrawler in our dresses? Never!" snapped her stepsisters. Cinderella thought it was just as well. If the mean girls had said yes, Cinderella wouldn't have known what to do. The next night, the stepsisters went to the ball again. Cinderella went, too, even more gloriously dressed. The prince never left her side. He was so charming that she forgot the fairy's warning. She heard the clock strike 12. Light and quick as a startled deer, she ran off. The prince couldn't catch her, but one of her slippers fell off and he picked it up tenderly. By the time she reached the gates, coach, servants, and all had gone. Nothing remained of her finery but one glass slipper. She got home just ahead of her stepsisters. They said, "We saw the princess again. She was more beautiful than ever, but she left so suddenly she lost the glass slipper. The prince found it and hid it next to his heart. We're sure he's in love with her." They were right. The next day, the prince announced he would marry the girl whose foot would fit the glass slipper. Princesses, duchesses, ladies all tried, without success. The herald brought the slipper to Cinderella's stepsisters, who tried their hardest to make the slipper fit, but they failed, smiling. Cinderella said, "May I try too?" Her stepsisters laughed, but the herald said, "My orders are to give a fair try to all." Cinderella's foot fit the slipper as if it had been made for her, and in fact it had. The stepsisters almost fainted when Cinderella pulled the other slipper from her pocket and put it on. Then the fairy godmother appeared, and with a tap of her wand, Cinderella's rags were changed into the most beautiful dress you can imagine. At last her stepsisters recognized her. They knelt at her feet and said they were sorry for all their meanness. Cinderella hugged them and said, "Of course I forgive you. Let's be friends from now on." Cinderella was brought in state to the palace. There the eager prince waited. A few days later, they were married, with much rejoicing. Cinderella was just as good as she was beautiful. She brought her sisters to live in the palace, then found them good husbands as soon as she could. Wow, what a good sister!